Want to start with something really basic, something kind of foundational, which is, why are we looking at these particular topics? Could have picked a lot of topics. I don't just do apps. I've been heavily involved in them, as I mentioned, but I am involved across the entire software development lifecycle. And I want you to think about your own experience for a moment when it comes to apps. And this is kind of what informs why these things are going to be relevant today, which is how many times do you discover an app on your device and you have no idea how it got there? I don't want you to blame your kids here. I've got plenty of apps that are installed because of the little ones, and ones across the different age range. But this is really about ones that you actually have installed. And you're like, where is this thing? You probably read the session title and sort of description talking about the fact that people have on average 80 plus apps installed. But what you probably don't know is that really only about 9 apps are used per day. So when you think about the apps that you might use yourself, you have the browser app, the messages app, a phone app, maybe some social apps. That kind of leaves you to be in the 1 to 2 other apps where you're competing heavily against other brands and other people to be relevant. So really thinking about this across the digital life cycle, late 1990s, early 2000s, how did you start to become competitively differentiated? It was by having a website. And then it was by having a better website. And then it was about e-commerce. And from there, eventually in the 2010s, we had these things called apps come along. And then it was about having a better app. And a lot of you probably have entire teams dedicated to your apps now, or at least maybe have someone building an app. So today, really, our app clips and our widgets kind of represent the next part of this competitive differentiator to let us stay relevant and connect better as brands to our users and to our customers. So I really want to address 2 problems today. The first problem is about getting in front of people, and that's what app clips are about. They present information, they present your app at the right time and the right opportune moment. And for widgets, it's going to be the other side of the problem, which is retention. How do you keep people moving? How do you keep people engaged? How are you surfacing kind of the best parts of your application once it's installed? In my experience working with our clients, we have seen very high adoption very quickly when we build these things. And at the same time, there's still very little competition on the market. So when you think about high value, high engagement, but little competition, to me, that's just a win-win-win. And it's why we really want you to think about these things as being part of your app strategy. I do want to mention just something really briefly here, which is I heard someone in a session earlier today, I believe it was the MoEngage folks, did some original research. And they talked about the fact that apps now are kind of on par with email, I think both at about 20% in terms of how users, since COVID-19 happened, want to engage with brands. So when you think about sort of that hitting that level of engagement, it makes sense. And in order to do the app clip and to do the widget, you also need to have obviously the app itself. So this is an important conversation, sort of foundational context here. So again, you probably have guessed what an agenda item might look like. This isn't sort of brain surgery here. But we are going to start with app clips. Then I'm going to go into widgets, and then I'll give you some brief takeaways. Just in case you hear me mention a lot about Apple today, a lot about iOS today. Apple did hit us and kind of struck a nerve with iOS 14, but I'm obviously very aware because I am the student of the industry and I'm a person that uses both platforms that Androids have widgets for a very long time, much longer than Apple has. But Apple kind of figured out this way to make it a little bit more personalized, a little bit more fun, a little bit more experience driven. And so that's why I'm going to use that as the lens today. And also just to simplify things, so I'm not kind of going back and forth and saying iOS and Android regularly. With that being the case, let's get into app clips to start. And app clips really are a unique feature to iOS as a whole. They're a little bit magical, honestly. They let users experience the functionality of your app without it being installed, but that doesn't mean you get it for free. These things actually are developed, they're designed, they're built into your existing app, but they're a small part of it. And effectively, there are lots of different use cases. You can kind of see some of the ones on the screen here, but they get presented at times when you're in person. So imagine if someone's at a checkout experience, they're ordering, they're grab and go, their loyalty, maybe more things like that, as well as digitally. So again, you could be on a website, you could be in an e-commerce flow, and an app clip can get presented. That might be still a little bit conceptual for you because I want to show you how the app clip actually will get installed here through a tangible example. This one is going to pop up through a website. So again, we're on a website here. This one's kind of more digitally oriented, more startup, not necessarily through a brand, but I wanted to show you this because it's a nice clean flow. And you can start to see here what happens first is you get this app clip banner. You might be familiar with just an app banner in general, which would cause you to install the app. This is, again, going to make it more interactive. By tapping on that, you then get this thing, what's called the app clip card. I'm going to focus on the components of the app clip card as we go through this conversation. But as soon as you tap that open button, you're now seeing the full app clip actually be used here. And then you can see another nice little CTA that would drive you into the App Store to finally install it. And then the thing that's really neat is that you actually do have the ability for the app clip to stay on the device, even though it's not fully installed. And you can see there's a little bit of delineation there, kind of signifying that this is not a fully installed app with that little dashed border. So now that you have a little bit of understanding of how this thing actually gets installed on the device, let's kind of walk through some best practices around it. And, the first thing here is that effectively we want to make sure that we're not requiring an authentication of features. This is just a foundational item because we're thinking about top of funnel when it comes to app clips. So people probably don't have the app. They may not be users of your app. So if you make it an authenticated feature, they're not going to get to go anywhere, right? They're going to effectively be stuck and not use this whole thing. But this is where it kind of gets more exciting when we start to think about how the app clip gets presented, what we should be doing with this. But really, we want to make sure these things function very, very quickly. So this is just a great example here where you were, presenting this in a parking experience. You parked your car. I went to school up in Boston, so I could do a really bad Boston accent about parking your car, but I'm not. I'm going to save you on that one today. But effectively, you could see this app clip. It pops up here. And imagine that the next step in this process is really just hitting the open button and then being able to pay for the parking and going on your merry way. Again, really, really powerful stuff here because the app is actually not installed. But now people got the benefit of your app, a little taste of the app, if you will, so that they'll come into the application later through the app clip. There are some limitations around them, though. The first thing being that you could actually only have one app clip. So that's why the strategy behind the app clip is going to be really important. And you also can't do any background activity. So if you're used to doing things once the app is not in the foreground, which is when users are actually looking at it, you can't do that with the app clip itself. And then finally, because these things got to open up super quick, it's got to be 10 megabytes or less. And Apple actually wants it to be even much smaller than that, which might be a little bit intimidating, but it can be done. Just trust me, it can be done. But the cool thing, again, here, that is not a limitation, even though I talked about limitations, is that you get the ability to send notifications to people without a request permission for up to 8 hours after you opened up the app clip. So again, don't use this as your moment to spam people, provide value, continue to get people to think about why your app is valuable. But this is a really important thing. And this is a nice little screenshot from Airship, who I know also is doing some cool talks. And we're really big fans of what they're doing out there. So notification strategy here would then tie into play to get people to think about how to install that application. Another thing that's important here, thinking about our app clips, is how do we combine this, what I like to call one-touch or native features. So again, kind of showed that in the parking example earlier. But think about app clips becoming that much more useful and sort of driving people down the funnel. So again, they're not really in your funnel at this point because they're just starting to experience the application. By tapping the buy button or a sign in with Apple, we now have the ability to start getting them to hopefully actually have that application installed. But these are useful in and of themselves, but they, again, kind of nice little integration point for getting people to really want to have the app installed. When we look at this as well, and I know I'm covering a lot of information here quickly, guys, so stick with me on it. This is another one-touch feature that's called an app clip code. This one happens to be NFC based. You can imagine putting these on key pieces of your infrastructure. It could be at a kiosk, a checkout area. In this case, it's embedded into the scooter itself. So there's one type of app clip code, but you also could do them just in a purely scannable model. And you can generate these things off of App Store Connect. Again, you could ask someone on your team who manages the app about that. Or if you want to get even more technical, again, you're probably not going to do this, but there's actually an app clip code generator command line tool. And Apple provides plenty of guidance around this, but this is a cool offline model. Again, imagine even the parking meter having something like this built into it. but it is a great way to ensure that people can quickly use the app clip and kind of move on. Kind of an encouragement on this one, don't get overexcited and trying to force the download once people have used the app clip. Remember, ultimately, you are trying to find a way to prove value and educate users on why your app should be installed. The other thing that I should mention, I said that the app clip does stay around, but it only stays around for 30 days. So you get that time to send them notifications within those first 8 hours without the permission request. And now we can continue to kind of say, here's why this app is valuable. And some of that really does just kind of happen through the app clip card itself. And I want to just break down these components before we turn our attention to widgets. And some of the stuff comes from Apple, some of it comes from industry folks, and some of it from our experience. But notice some really nice, enticing photography here. Relate it to your brand, make it accessible. You could see the title and the subtitle, specific messaging that really is action-oriented. And then you even have this little button, make it a single word, open, view, something like that. So that's your app clip card. And this sort of wraps up the part of the app clips as we go now into our widgets. So on the widget side, this is something that you might have seen. You might have more exposure to it. So I won't really kind of educate you as much in terms of the install process on this one, but I do want you to have a baseline understanding that these are effectively extensions of your app. There are apps that are dedicated, exclusively to focusing on building widgets. You're probably not doing that as a brand, but they could sit both on the home screen and on the today view. So there's different places that the widgets can live. And that's, widgets are really about personalization. They're about expression. And they do have use cases that make sense for brands. This could be something like a frequently done activity. It could be a utility-based thing. Imagine for frequent activity, ordering or reordering. Maybe it's a favorite. Maybe it's something that's in the cart. It could be specials or deals. It could be news or information, timely stuff here. Lots of really good use cases. Again, recommend the whole process. Start with some brainstorming before you just immediately go build out your widgets. From a technical standpoint, think about what's really going to benefit your specific customer base. So some similar best practices here, in terms of really thinking about these small, little, tiny parts of your application, right? The app clip is really small. Building an app is more scoped, right, to some extent. And then the widget itself is sitting on the home screen. And you want it to really do one thing well. So you can see here with Panera, big fan of Panera, or as my family in New York would call it, Paneras. I go to Paneras. You can see here that this widget is all about speed and convenience. You can see customers doing this for their favorite breakfast or lunch items. It does one thing, but it does it really, really well. And that's what widgets are about, right? They're more on this widget because there's some other considerations around it as we go forward. But this is a nice way to just let someone do one thing quickly. And at the same time, it's worth calling out, make sure that you think about, is the widget providing regular value? You don't want your widget to get stale. You don't want to get boring, or it does face deletion just like an app would, right? So you can delete the app, you can delete the widget, you can delete the app clip. So what do we want to do here? Well, you can see here with the Yelp widgets, there's a couple different sizes. And in this case, they make recommendations that rotate. So it could be something like what's nearby, what's highly rated, maybe something that offers delivery or takeout so that they're keeping it fresh across the daytime. And another thing you could see with the Geico widget is it's an example where a widget is personalized, not from a content standpoint, but really from light and dark mode, including some messaging that changes. And this is something that's kind of neat. And I'm going to give you some inside information. Apple had its developer conference this week, WWDC, and they announced iOS 15. So I want to make sure I'm on record here. I'm not going to reveal anything non-public. This is from the public keynote because you know how Apple might be with people sharing their secrets. But there's this new feature coming out called Focus that will adapt to a user's mindset and the setting. So as an example, Focus could be for home, it could be for work, it could be for the gym. And so the focus actually changes the kinds of widgets that are on the screen, the kinds of apps that might be on the screen, the notification settings, and so forth. So this is a great example of matching the mindset, going beyond just content itself or even time of day. And this is going to be important for you as you think about building out your widget. You also need to be aware of the state of the application and pushing people to the right location as they tap into it. As sort of a mention from earlier, I said, be aware of authenticated features for the app clip. You can do authenticated features for your widgets, not to confuse you, but you can do it in that case. But if you do that, just remember that people may not be signed in. So you have to account for that state. So in this case, we see that we're signed out both of Gmail or signed out of Panera. And this is why I said I was going to mention some of these widgets regularly, is that you want to think about having a widget that at least gives you one option where someone's not signed in. Again, these are great widgets, but imagine providing a widget where they don't have to be signed in. Maybe they're a new user to the application. And then in the case when they're signed in, obviously we want to look at, the different parts and the places that the widget will drive them. In this case for Gmail, which is obviously more utility focused, you can consider having someone getting driven into a search result, the inbox itself, or a compose screen. And in this case, you will need to either have something called URL schemes or deep links in order to make this efficient. Again, fans of things like Branch.io, but you guys probably all have deep link providers to some extent. But that's an important part here for the widget to make sure that the widget operates properly. So the final thing here is just to really ensure you've pushed far enough and you didn't just kind of make your widget a checkbox, right? Don't just do a widget, for example. There's lots of different things you could do here. You could generally have up to 5 widgets. I say generally because there's a little workaround where you could have more. It's not something I recommend. But essentially, when you look at these, they're different sizes. And you also can make them configurable. So you could have an app where maybe based on the size, it does different things. Again, I'm talking about Panera and some of these other things. Imagine if there is a larger size of that widget, you could do multiple different rapid reorders to dictate, how the sort of widget operates. And again, think about your features that people are using now as a starting point for your widget. But also maybe there's features that you want people to use more that you think is interesting. And that's another way to explore on this stuff. So the long story short on our widgets, really expression. And the more you have around that, the more you won't be a deleted widget and sort of have the ability to continue to interact with folks. So just some real takeaways here. And then obviously want to open it up for the Q&A. I'm going to look at the Q&A here in a minute. If you haven't posted anything, totally fine. But that being the case, we're still in the early days of these technologies. So you have a really unique opportunity. Again, as mentioned, this is something that we're seeing a lot of engagement on, but there's still not that competition. So you can reach our app clips ultimately as this top of funnel, most opportune moment. So again, get people into the funnel through your app clip and then keep them there with the widgets for high value engagement. Apple really is focusing on this stuff. So the way to think about this is Apple's doubling down. We are now just at the start of the new development lifecycle for Apple and to some extent Android. So you have an opportunity to get into the app stores with these new features and functionalities, not just for the existing stuff, but for iOS 15 leading into the fall. And Apple loves to feature brands that are doing cool things with their technology. So some of the ones I'm mentioning here, they were featured because they built these things before everyone else did, and they're getting a whole bunch of marketing from Apple. But really kind of ultimately think about these as weeks instead of months in terms of measuring how long they take to do. 6 to 12 weeks is a good example for some of them, not all of them. It's going to obviously depend on the complexity of your code base. But don't think about them as 6 to 12 months. If you're doing that, you definitely have overscoped these things. And that's not going to work out well for your development lifecycle.